Thank you for attending the, what do I call this? Open Data APIs and IoT and how they're changing our world. I actually wrote that title about 2 months ago, so today I scrambled on trying to figure out what I meant that day. I'm Johnny Diggz. I'm the chief evangelist for a company called Tropo. We were recently acquired by Cisco, and so my job as chief evangelist is to interact with our developer community, of which we have about 250,000 developers in Tropo's developer community, and talk to them about how they can leverage the Tropo API to build awesome applications. What is the Tropo API, you ask? Tropo is a cloud-based API for real-time communications, specifically telephone calls, inbound and outbound telephone calls, SMS, and it really makes it easy for any developer to add those types of features to any application. So it's all done using a simple API. There's no hardware to deploy. It's a complete software solution. It sits in the cloud. It's completely free for developers, and all they need to do is go to the tropo.com website, sign up for free, and they can start building or adding these features to their existing app or building a new app. A couple of the companies that are here that have built their apps based on the Tropo platform, SeeClickFix being one of them, and Textizen as well. So, and there's probably a few others floating around here because we've been a supporter of Code for America for about 4 years now, pretty much almost since the beginning of when they were invented. A couple other things that I do. I founded a nonprofit called Geeks Without Bounds in 2010, right about the same time Code for America came out. Geeks Without Bounds is an accelerator for humanitarian startups and social good applications. So we take and incubate startups that are specifically in the humanitarian space. We kind of have a leaning towards disaster response, but we do a lot of other things as well. So if you want to check out gwob.org, it's actually our logo is the URL. I'm also one of the founders of Code for Orlando, and Code for Orlando has been around for about 3 years. Had not done much, but I am from Orlando and was living in San Francisco for a couple years. Went back home to Orlando and decided I was going to help kickstart the Code for Orlando group. When I first joined, there were about 6 people that were keeping it chugging along. It was essentially no more than a website and a meetup, but now we have over 400 members in the Orlando Code for America organization. We're now going to talk a little bit more about what we've been doing. I'm also the co-founder of a makerspace in Orlando called Factor. Factor got started about 1.5 years ago. Makerspace is a place where people can get a membership, and we have lots of tools and 3D printers and laser cutters and a wood shop, and we do classes and help people who want to build stuff. It's actually a picture of Buddy Dyer, the mayor of Orlando. That's me behind him, and we were teaching him how to solder. He's holding up a little Mickey Blinky thing that he soldered together. It looks very proud. But he's been a really good supporter of both Code for Orlando and the maker community. He's a good guy, that Buddy. I'm also a professional dueling piano player. I played at Howl at the Moon in Orlando for 6 years before I joined the Tropo team. Yes? Do you ever sleep? And sponsored by Red Bull, yes. I do sleep, but yeah, I guess that when you take all that together, it looks like I do a lot of too many things. But I just do things that I'm passionate about, and so it leads me in. All of these to me make like they're all connected in my brain. So like Tropo, as chief evangelist, I get to travel a lot and interact with a bunch of geeks. with Geeks Without Bounds, I get to interact with geeks specifically in the humanitarian space. With the makerspace, it's geeks building stuff. Sometimes those geeks build stuff that help people in the humanitarian space that use Tropo. And then because I get to travel a lot and sponsor a lot of events, sometimes I get to be the entertainment at those events, which at the Code for America Summit 2 or 3 years ago, I was the entertainment for the cocktail hour that we had on Friday night. Those are the events that I'm like, it's like that trifecta. I get to talk about Geeks Without Bounds to a Code for America audience, and it's sponsored by Tropo, and I get to be the entertainment. So it's pretty cool. But today, we're talking about a few things. Open data. Anybody here not know what open data means? I'm hoping so, but just in case, it's the convergence between data and open and the government. And specifically for this audience, we're talking about open government data. But it doesn't have to be government data, but I figured with the Code for America audience, they'd care about that the most. APIs. An API is basically a way for two separate applications to communicate together. It's sort of like a handshake between one application and another. APIs are really cool because it standardizes a way. You don't have to write a different type of code for different programs. You're one set of API that's usually published, and any developer who understands how to code in web languages can communicate with that application. It can be a commercial application. It can be a government application. It can be an application like Tropo, but it's just a standard way for applications to interact with each other. And then, of course, we have the Internet of Things, or as Cisco likes to call it, the Internet of Everything. I figured I'd throw my hat into the bunch, and I call it the Internet of Anything. So I'm just going to refer to it as IOA from here on out. But I read something recently that Cisco is predicting that there will be 50 billion connected devices by 2020. Is the latest data that I've seen. So the devices that are connected to the internet will far outnumber the humans that are connected to the internet. And those can be anything from sensors to lights to cars to even other applications. And it's really between the Internet of Things and APIs and open data, it's really this convergence of these concepts and technologies are really changing the way that citizens interact with their governments. So I'm going to talk about a couple of the use cases that I've been part of, and then some of the efforts that we're moving forward to bring the next generation of these apps and kind of figure out ways to innovate on them. So in 2009, a friend of mine, Dave Gerbleski, and I were sitting on his front porch. Dave works for Microsoft in the justice and public safety sector. He's a chief architect at Microsoft. And I was working for Tropo. I just started there. And we were sitting on his front porch pondering what's next for the internet. We both were sitting there trying to figure out the relevance of Twitter. Why did we need yet another social network that seemed to be more limited than Facebook, and even more limited than MySpace? And we were sitting there, and a couple of police cars raced by, coincidentally, and we kind of were sitting there going, I wonder where those guys are headed. And I had remembered seeing a blog post about that the city of Orlando, where we were living at the time, had released a web page. It was a brand new open data initiative from the city. This is even before open data was like really a term. And so the city police department was publishing on their webpage a list of active calls. So these are calls that came into 911, and this was their big data initiative. That's me and Dave sitting there on our phones, pondering all of this. So this is what they came up with. And this is actually a newer version, but back then it was a little less informative. But this is dispatch calls for service. This is a page that updates every 60 seconds, and it gives you an incident number, which is not very valuable to a normal citizen. Date and time, yes, that's kind of important. A call type, so we've got general disturbance, school. I actually grabbed this today, so this afternoon. So you see they have different call types. Then they have a police district. I don't know, does anybody know what police district you live in? Two people. Does anybody know what neighborhood you live in? Okay. And then it has an address. Some of them are intersections, some of them are addresses. So we were like, oh, that's kind of cool. And we looked behind this webpage and realized that this was coming from an RSS feed. And so we wrote a little program and interfaced it with the Twitter API and figured out a way to make it a little more relevant. Now, instead of police district, we took the data of the address, the location, and matched that up with some city map data that we found and geocoded it and found the neighborhood name. So we decided we'd push this into Twitter feeds with a hashtag of the neighborhood name, to have a hashtag of Orlando, because we were like, maybe we'll do this in more than one city, which we have. And also hashtagging the incident type. And we just started doing this. And we didn't do a press release or whatever. We just kind of just started doing it. And we'd tell our neighbors, like, look at this cool thing that we did. And they'd be like, oh, that's really cool. And so they would sign up for Twitter. It was the first, I still have many of my neighbors. They sign up for Twitter and they only have one thing that they follow, which is the neighborhood. And with, I don't know if you know, but with Twitter you can also get text messages. Initially we set it up with Tropo, but then after a while we were like, well, why don't we just have Twitter send the text messages? It's free. And so we set it up, and then one day, we also did the same thing on Facebook eventually. So we started pushing stuff into Facebook, and then Facebook was actually a group, so people could post additional notes about something that happened. On Twitter, we didn't have the really ability to do that, but it started becoming a thing. This Facebook group now has 725 members in a relatively small neighborhood. The end result is that crime has gone down in this particular neighborhood, which is the most active one, which happens to be the one we live in. Crime has gone down over 50% in the neighborhood. And it's only because citizens are more aware of what's going on around them. And the information that was produced, or the data that's produced on the police active calls page, is now turned into relatable information that citizens can get in the palm of their hand. Initially, the police did not like this at all. Their knee-jerk reaction was, well, we don't need citizens showing up at the incident, which never really happens. It never happened. And the other thing is that we got some pushback from like city council members, because suddenly right now we've got about 6 years of city crime data in our database that we've been collecting, that we can report on and make cool visual reports and tell the story of the actual crime in neighborhoods. Well, as an elected city council official, they would much prefer to control the message of crime in their area. So we got a lot of pushback from them, and we've had some pushback from individual citizens. We just produce the raw data that the police department, we're just duplicating. Florida has pretty progressive open data laws. There's a thing called the Florida Sunshine Law, which means every city, county, and state, all the records have to be public. So you can make record requests. Well, the problem is that you can make a record request, and typically they say, okay, which data line do you want? And that'll be 25 cents.
We're like, well, this lets us get all of the data, and we can do whatever we want with it. And that's like the paradigm shift between truly open data and an open data policy, where you can get the records, but you can't get all of the records. And so, anyway, Tweet 3PO was a success. We've been on the cover of the Orlando Sentinel. We've had multiple news stories about it. It's been duplicated in other cities, and we've been expanding it and improving it and adding new features all the time. So that's like just one American city. There's also a cool way that APIs and open data has been used, and this is a project that came out of Geeks Without Bounds. Lack of access to clean water globally is a huge problem. Some of the statistics here is that 1 in 9 people do not have access to clean water, and that's worldwide. Huge health problem. Approximately 3.5 million people die each year due to inadequate water supply. Only 67% of the world's population has access to sanitation. So, these are kind of scary numbers, and so we partnered with a group in Nairobi to take a look at this problem, and this is a typical water access point, they call it. It's a well. Sometimes people walk 5 to 10 miles to get water from a well like this. But the problem is that sometimes there's not enough water in the well, and that wasted a person's day going to get water. There's no way of them knowing. Sometimes the well has got tainted water. And so we put together a pilot project with a local university to install IoT sensors inside some of the wells. And the IoT sensors could test pH, they could test oxygen levels, they could test temperature, they could test the water level, conductivity. All these things combined can give an accurate representation of the quality of the water in the well. And if something is out of whack, the IoT sensor can fire off a request. And in this case, it was a request to a Tropo app that was sitting in the cloud, and the Tropo app would fire off a text message to a technician who could then physically go out and find out what's wrong with the well. And this has been deployed in Nairobi and Kenya and a couple other places to great success. And right now we're looking at getting funding to duplicate this in many more cities. But it's a very powerful yet simple way that shows how IoT and an API can save lives. And yes. Oh, I thought. Yeah. That was the end of my sentence. So you're saying if you can, you have access to data and you can have access to the API to wield that, you could create the API. Yeah. How? Yeah. So how do you find developers to work for free is the question. Yeah. So it's difficult to get funding for stuff and something like that. You can a lot of it is through groups like Code for America brigades. There are other initiatives, and I'll talk about a little bit. The group at Wearable World has an accelerator, and they get funding from corporations to have their startups talk directly to cities to find out what their IoT needs are, what their open data needs are, what their API needs are, and so they get corporate funding from companies like Cisco, and so hackathons are a great way to do it, but usually you get proof of concept, and it's difficult to take that proof of concept to a usable product because cities need additional layers like security and scalability. But it's increasingly getting easier because as these TLAs, these three-letter acronyms, get more and more understood by cities, they understand the value of an API. They understand the value of having open data in a standard format, like using something like Socrata. And then they realize that not only are these things providing data in a more valuable way to the citizens, but an even cheaper way than they have in the past. You'll run into problems with budgeting and all of that, but how do I? Yeah. No, it's a real problem, but it's the tools that we have built, we never really even interacted with the city. We just built the stuff because they were, one, we were curious to see if it could be done, and two, after you build something really cool, now the city turns around and they show our stuff off at their meetings, saying, "Look what our citizens are building for us." And that's the drum that I always beat is, hey, if you open up your data, instead of hiring a company to come in and build a smart bus stop, open your data to where all of your buses are. Let developers build their own cool "Where's My Bus" app, and let the Apple App Store figure out what's the best one. But cities, they're still have the mentality that we got to go out and build this "Where's My Bus" app, where there's probably a dozen open source ones out there already that they could just use. But there's another word that cities get scared of: open source, right? So I think that the bigger solution is to get cities to embrace more and more forms of open data internally, and let the Code for America brigades build on them. Let the volunteers, because there's tons of people in Orlando, where I'm from, that have skills and they want to lend them, but they don't know what to do with them. So I know that doesn't 100% answer your question, but yes.
So the application you described earlier, the one that's
Yes.
inspiration and serendipity. You had the inspiration when the cop cars went by.
Yeah.
And serendipity that you were able to find
A data feed. Yeah.
gave you the information.
Yeah, that would have been dead in the water if there was no data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Perhaps this is an unspoken need at this point, because me, as a representative of my government,
Mm-hmm.
I want to find ways to provide data that is that useful. But coming around to more conventional ways of getting that information, we're not getting that feedback.
Mm.
So, can you think of maybe ways that you can engage with governments and say, hey, look, just like you said, if you open your bus data up,
Mm-hmm.
you can build these cool apps.
Yeah.
How would you engage? How would you start that conversation?
Well, I mean, I was planning on talking about this. Actually, I think it's coming up. Let's see. All right. Let me just jump forward here. Okay. So one of the initiatives that we did with the Code for Orlando Brigade, we were part 2 years ago. We were doing the National Day of Civic Hacking, which Code for America is involved with, NASA's involved with. There's a bunch of, and it's a day for people who care about they're civic minded that want to help. And this was before the Code for America or Code for Orlando Brigade got big. So we only had like 6 of us, and of the 6, there were only like 2 coders. And so we realized pretty quickly that it was not going to be a day that we spent coding an app, But so we spent the day discussing the challenges, and at the end of the day, we accomplished one thing. We figured out some wording to do a change.org petition to get to have the mayor of Orlando declare Orlando an open data city, which means that, across the board, when and if possible, they will make data not just available one record at a time, but all of the data in a standardized feed and put it up on a Socrata-like platform so people can access it, open 311 type standard. And so we did the petition. We spent the next year promoting that. And on the following year on National Day of Civic Hacking, the mayor of Orlando came to our meetup, and at that time we had probably about 300 people show up, and he declared Orlando an open data city. And so, that took pushing on multiple levels. We had people involved from the city that were part of Code for Orlando. We had people who were involved, customers of the city, vendors for the city, just volunteer coders and grassroots efforts, and it took all of that. And then finally, a light bulb went off on Mayor Dyer's, head, or maybe he knew it all along, but he had a reason to declare it. And now we've got that mandate going all the way through the city organization. So now it's coming top down, whereas before we were just like a grassroots from every direction we could think of possible. Will that work in every city? I don't know, but it worked in Orlando, and now it's I wouldn't say it's law, but it's policy. And we went and got Socrata and connected them with the city, and so they could understand how they could implement the software, and what the costs were going to be. And we got Microsoft to come in and offer free hosting in Azure, and so it takes a lot of legwork, but if you have the connections and the pieces parts, it can be done. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Who owns them? Who's responsible for them? Citizens?
So the question was for once an application has been deployed in using city open data, what happens if that application needs to be updated, the underlying data changes, format or whatever, and who owns the app, and who's responsible for maintaining the app? Good question. Typically, I always encourage apps to be built as open source apps. Then they can be opened to a larger community of open source advocates. And there's, I actually happen to be wearing my my OzCon shirt, which is one of the O'Reilly Media conferences. There's a whole world out there of open source advocates that will help and maintain and develop open source projects. My personal feeling is that the brigade, the city would say, hey, something's broken, and the brigade would put together a plan or a hackathon or something to say, hey, let's spend some cycles fixing this app that's broken. That may, the brigade could have fallen apart depending on leadership and changes in funding and all of that stuff. So that's not always the solution. You could also say that at some point they turn it over to the city, and the city, hopefully the city has a developer some resource that could figure it out. One strong thing is to always, document your code well, and so if another developer has to come in and take a look at and fix something, if you do document the way you should, they should be able to figure out what the problem is and fix it. So, all right, we're going to move on a little bit and go back to where it was. So some of the efforts that we're working on now, one of the partnerships that we're getting starting with Wearable World, Dash IoT World. I just noticed, is that a new thing? I've got two of the Wearable World folks here. If anybody wants to talk to them, one of their efforts is, that's JD and Lauren. They have a project called IoT for Cities. I mentioned it earlier. The connecting IoT startups with cities and figuring out what IoT needs that those cities may have, and having those startups work on them. And if they're successfully pilot them, they can turn around and hopefully duplicate that in other cities, either as a commercial venture or as a civic venture. I guess that's up to the startup themselves. But they're starting a pilot program with the city of San Francisco, and so if you're interested to learn more about that, they'll be around. It might be hanging down. Tropo has a little table downstairs too. So if you're after one of your stamps, you got to come by our table, and you can talk to them about that. Cisco has a huge effort in connected communities and smart and connected communities. Did you want to speak to what you guys are doing, or you? Yeah.
We're working with cities around the world to help them utilize the technology that the city already has in place. It's not a sales effort as much as it is an enabling effort to try to help the city use what they have and what they've invested in, whether it's wired or wireless networks, whether it's data center, whether it's a mobile communications platform or a social media platform. Some of the cities that we've worked with are interested in harnessing the power of the Internet of Things to help them deliver better services to their citizens or to visitors to the city. Other cities are interested in dramatically improving the efficiency of the way the city operates to reduce their costs and increase the productivity of the workforce, particularly the city employees and contractors. Some cities like Barcelona and maybe a dozen others have been very ambitious, and they're trying to combine a lot of different things that the city is wanting to do. Waste collection, I can describe the initiative there. Better, faster waste collection, particularly municipal solid waste that accumulates in some parts of the city and doesn't get addressed and get picked up in time. Traffic lights to facilitate the flow of traffic and reduce congestion. So the general idea is to light up the, maybe you'd call them unintelligent, not connected yet assets that the city has, like a traffic light or a parking meter or a parking space, and find easy and simple ways to connect those devices, those endpoints, or those assets like a parking space, which isn't a device, of course, connect those and make the data flow usable and insightful for somebody who needs to make a decision, whether it's somebody looking for a parking space to park in, or maybe it's a parking systems manager who's trying to figure out where is the traffic, where is the demand for parking, so they can maybe move parking spaces from one part of town where it's not as needed and free up those spaces for commerce or for playground, and move parking spaces to the part of the city where it is needed. So I think we're at the early stages of this process, and we bought Tropo because there's a tool set there that helps us work with cities on the way that they want to use data, which is easy, simple to communicate effectively to citizens, some of whom have smartphones, some of whom have smart tech savvy, and some don't. And hopefully, we can talk with any of you about what we're doing and whether it's relevant to, your own work. We have, offices all over the world. Not every office is engaged, but increasingly more and more umbrella framework for their big or small solutions to be connected to the city in a more effective way.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah. So, like you mentioned, Tropo was recently acquired by Cisco, and so we're figuring out the new and innovative ways that we can leverage our new Uncle Cisco to because Cisco's a huge company and they're all over the world, and they power the internet with lots of hardware. They've got a huge push and effort, obviously, with them recognizing how many IoT devices, or as Cisco calls them, IoE devices, that will be, increasing by almost exponentially in the next 5 to 10 years. So they're investing heavily into this space, and also investing heavily in helping expose their technologies via simpler APIs than they have in the past, because they're understanding that having a vibrant developer ecosystem that can quickly build apps on top of Cisco technologies is extremely important. And so they're one of the reasons that they bought us is because Tropo has is bringing a 250,000 developer community that already understands a lot of this, that already understands the concepts of cloud-based APIs and how to interact with them. And so it's very exciting to that since we joined Cisco, and it's also given us the opportunity to help and sponsor events like this, where Code for America is a non-for-profit organization. Anytime I have a chance to help them and assist them with their mission, it always makes me feel good, and I'm extremely happy that this is also the first time that I've ever gotten our logo on a lanyard. So this is a big milestone for us.
One other thing just to add, we built a city digital platform, which I hope
A city digital platform?
I'll show you.
Okay, cool.
CDP will become one of the focal points for the new push in the developer community that Tropo brought to Cisco.
Nice.
So those 200,000 developers will be hearing about the city digital platform fairly soon, which
Cool.
allows a lot of different solutions for the city to be plugged into a common data platform.
Cool. Yes, sir. S- mhm. Yeah. So the question was, with with the abundance of data, how does a city choose which or how to expose that data, which APIs to leverage or create? Yeah. So, I mean, platforms like Socrata help solve some of that, because there's these like Open 311 standard that has standard APIs. And lots of cities have adopted that. Socrata they were born at a very opportune time when open data was just becoming a thing and needed a standard, and so they pushed really hard to get the Open 311 standard and standardize on that. So, a platform like that would help hone those, and then because Socrata's been around for a while, they have their own developer community, and so there's a lot of open source apps that wield APIs from data that is in the Socrata system. So you won't have to build your "Where's my next bus" app because someone already did it and open sourced it. So I would suggest, if you haven't looked at Socrata and talked to those guys, you should talk to them. You could always roll your own, but I think that obviously budgets are what they are, but a lot of times building your own solution ends up in the long run being more expensive than licensing something that's already a proven technology that other cities are using. So I would suggest looking at your counterparts in other cities and looking what they've done, because there's a lot of cities that are doing it really right. San Francisco is the one, Seattle's on the cutting edge. Take a look at what they've done and just duplicate it, because if it works in one city, it's likely to work in another. Not always the case, but I think your chances are better than not. So yeah, the other efforts we've made, we love Code for America. We really like what they're doing. We're supporting Code for America in a number of ways. These are a couple of companies that were born out of our partnership, directly or indirectly, with Code for America, and there are many more like these in various shapes and sizes. So we support individual brigades financially. We obviously sponsor this event, and have you'll be seeing a lot larger partnership now, especially now that we've got the Cisco involved with their IoT efforts and their connected cities, and with our partnership with Wearable World. I'm trying to kind of bring this all together and see if we can create some new awesomeness that will happen just magically from serendipity that is created by smart people and money. We already talked about that. There's the whole big picture, and there's me. Any other questions? We have few.
One of the things that you helped make ended up very likely saving lives.
Yeah.
Are there any other examples of things that you just feel like were a slam dunk or that you're really excited about?
There's all kinds of cool stuff that has. I've been very active in the humanitarian and civic space, doing lots and lots of hackathons. And a lot of cool things have come out of hackathons. Maybe not things that changed the world, but maybe did change some lives. One of the ones that came out of Philly in one of the hackathons was a simple text messaging app that you could text your zip code, and it would tell you the 3 closest places where you could get fresh fruit. And this was an initiative geared towards inner city, low income areas where people tend to go to the local bodega or the local 7-Eleven or the local Wawa or whatever, and aren't eating healthy foods. They're eating snack foods, and the greater goal is to combat obesity, which is rampant in some of the same socioeconomic areas. And so I always thought that was a very cool and simple app, and they did the legwork to find the data in their city to find the fresh fruit in the areas that they were looking at. Another cool app was it's very similar, but it was restaurants that have extra food that they're going to have to throw away because of regulations. And so you could text in as a restaurant and post that you have, food, and then food banks would come and pick up the food and use that to feed people in need. Those are a couple other examples of cool ways. The nice thing about Tropo as an API is that it's about communications. And one of the things that I've done a talk before on what I call the communications horizon. And the communications horizon is that point where communication fails. So to give you some examples, or where communications or why communications can fail. The most common is technology, right? Cell phone goes out of service, your battery dies, you don't have the app, right? So communication breaks down because of technology. But it can also break down in many other ways. It can be a generational thing, right? So a young kid trying to communicate with an elderly person, they might actually be speaking English, but they can't really speak the same language. Socioeconomic communication breakdown happens all the time. So it also happens in cases of violence or natural disaster. Communication can break down because cell phone towers get knocked down. And the problem with communication breakdowns is that when people of different cultures or different backgrounds or communication can break down because of language, that's a very easy one. When communication breaks down, people tend, and people don't have access to information that they need, people get scared. And when people get scared, people do things like start hoarding or start looting or start causing violence. And so one of the things I would like about Tropo as an API and why it's very useful in these types of situations is it makes it really easy to quickly set up an app to mass send text messages to let people know, stay in your homes or run for your lives. Like, but But seriously, that happens when if there's a flash flood, it would be nice. And police don't always have this, but most cell phones have this technology now. But years ago, there was no way to send a mass text to everyone who had a phone turned on. The national disaster people have that. There's one that's built into phones now. But what if it's not a national disaster or disaster of that scale? Maybe it's hey, you might want to stay inside tonight because we're sending trucks around with spraying mosquito spray, and so it's not a emergency, but it's like, here's a little safety precaution. Maybe bring the pets in so they're not inhaling these chemicals. So it lets people build a very quick app to do that, and also in outbound voice calls, you want to collect. Maybe city wants to do a quick survey of constituents, and not necessarily like a big citywide survey, but they're like, hey, if you attended the city council meeting, why don't you call in and rate the meeting, and you can collect some data and you get your own little survey. It doesn't require a whole lot of city resources, maybe just one guy who knows how to write some web code. So as a platform, Tropo lends itself to helping cities communicate with their citizens in the ways that people are used to communicating. It's not like you got to install an app. I like to say all the time, there are 2 killer apps built into every single phone, whether it's a smartphone or feature phone or a dumb phone, and one is text messaging, and the other is sending and receiving phone calls. Most people, no matter where they come from, if they have a phone, they can do one of the 2 of those things, and so that's kind of why I like evangelizing Tropo, and why it also works really well with my other interests in building civic-minded apps and humanitarian-focused apps. So yes.
My question is about the money. We're interested in building civic-minded apps, and you did one in Orlando that seems like it's really something that's needed.
Mm-hmm.
Did the city of Orlando ever license that app, or are they displaying it? I mean, what I'm
Yeah.
trying to understand is, I realize it's important to be civic-minded, and it's a good thing,
Mm-hmm.
but if that app were licensed, like the lady pointed out, it needs to be supported, and
Mm-hmm.
there's got to be some security measures.
Sure.
The city's going to have lawyers that are going to look at the licensing agreement. How does that work in with what you've developed and is successful? Has it been licensed?
No, the city. The question is, in the Tweet 3PO app, did we did the city license that app, or how does that work? The city has never taken an official stance on the app, so I think that they know it's out there, and if it turns off someday, no one's gonna. Well, people might call the city and ask why it turned off, but they say like, I don't even know what you're talking about. It's not a city app. So I think that depending on the legal and economic environment of a particular city, they may want to license an app if they like it. And we've had other municipalities approach us about doing it in their city, and usually our answer is, well, if you want to custom brand it for your city, then you will have to license it. But if you want us to offer Tweet 3PO to and make it so your residents can subscribe to Twitter streams, you just got to give us the data, and we tell them what format the data needs to be, and then we just add that city and we start hashtagging their city. And for us, there's no change in the app. It's just adding more data streams and hashtagging, different city names. Right now we have different neighborhood names for Orlando, but there is a hashtag for Orlando. So, and we've done pilots. We got Seattle to give us some, they didn't give us the police data, but they gave us fire data. So for the fire departments. So we started doing that for Seattle, and we've also done some work with Toronto and we've been in talks with Las Vegas as well. So it all depends on like I said, if a city wants to have a branded city backed thing, there would definitely be some licensing involved, and as we have the benefit of, because it was founded by me and Dave, I can provide some financial backing through Tropo, and Dave is getting free hosting of the app through Microsoft, so we may be uniquely qualified to offer that, but you can get grants. You can get, nonprofits can set that up with. There's almost every hosting provider has some sort of foundational offering for free hosting of apps, and if you dig around, you can find it. Might not be something that lasts forever, but I think that the most important thing is getting a proof of concept off the ground, and those are easy to get off the ground. And then if citizens are engaging with it and the city sees value, I would hope to think that eventually they find the budget. I think we got time for a couple more questions. If anyone got one, yes.
Back to IoT a bit. I'm curious what your experience has been with open hardware. Do you see the challenges? Do you see adoption?
I'm primarily a software guy. I play around with like Raspberry Pis and Arduinos and stuff like that. But it's something I've been more learning about. So I couldn't really talk with much knowledge. If any area of my geekness is lacking, it's my hardware. I did learn. I did build my first. I soldered my first Arduino together about 6 months ago, and have been playing with the software side of it. And my goal is to build a piano that controls the Arduino via MIDI and lights up LEDs based on the keys I'm pressing. But I saw someone else do it, but I endeavor to build my own. Yes.
This question's maybe a little bit particular. You were talking about, when you think about smart cities, you're working with them to use appliances or endpoints that are already in place. You talked about streetlight, for example. But at some point, and I'm not sure what there's an RF technology with streetlights now, I have no idea. But in order to get them into the cloud and actually start to aggregate data, someone has to purchase hardware and start to put it in. And I'm
Yeah.
I think a sales process, but at some point someone's got to buy hardware. I'm just curious how that's going.
Yeah, Gordon can probably field that one a little bit better than me.
Yeah, the nice bit of news right now is that as cities are transitioning to LED, they're getting smart about using the light pole for more than just LED lamp. They're making them wireless access points. And so the data that's available on a traffic light or on the street side for intelligent transportation monitoring or for a parking space or a parking meter now has more than just AT&T's wireless access point to talk to. So as that outdoor smart light thing happens, we're seeing a lot of cities enabling those lights to be more than just a lamp. And so there are environmental sensors on those. There are, counting the traffic flows, looking at the type of vehicle, how much emission, of various kinds of
You
vehicles.
see how many Jaguars go by?
Sensors, yes, that's right, that helps. The sensors
Teslas.
are very important. So all that data can now be called through talking to the wireless access point, which may be on the same light pole. That's what's happening in a lot of the cities that we're seeing.
Lauren, do you want to add something to that?
Sure. Just to kind of go off that hardware initiative, imagine for cities connecting large corporations that might have that hardware infrastructure that are looking for smart city solutions, and combining it with developers that are developing solutions for those, pollution sensors, parking sensors, incorporating it into their current hardware and their current lamp codes, et cetera, and then piloting those in cities. So we're working on essentially correcting that paradigm, right? Where does the funding come from? Where does the hardware come from? Where does the development come from? And where's the place that we can, pilot these solutions where we get the corporations, the startups, and the city together in one spot? It's kind of a win-win.
So we just announced a $26 million investment in Sensity, which is a Bay Area-based lighting company, outdoor lighting company that we teamed up with General Electric, with Simon Properties, which owns a lot of malls around the world, and with Acuity Brands. And the idea was to really enable that outdoor light to be 10 times much more than just a light post in the city.
So the last piece of that really is letting these people who are building this technology sit down with the city and say, how is this compelling for the city? How does this make it into your next lighting cycle to buy this hardware? And what sort of things can we solve within the city that make this a really compelling value proposition for the city as a consumer of that hardware?
So we were a hardware company and had something that consumers really liked and was beneficial for the municipality. We talked to someone like you and see if there was something like a pilot we could run.
Yep.
And we could propose, half a dozen cities. If San Francisco already has something in this area and doesn't have bandwidth to serve as a host for a demo, we could suggest other cities in San Francisco just to have Joe get that, like Richmond in the Bay Area.
One last question.
Thank you. I heard that since sensors are becoming so cheap, that you could just buy eventually buy a pack of them and just attach them to things like car keys or really anything.
Yeah.
And I love, Gordon, what you said in the previous session about how when you get all this data and it's available for people to see and compare against each other, then you get natural and healthy competition towards reducing energy footprints or whatever. And I can imagine there's a whole future for this in social service delivery, whether it's reading or whatever, literacy and competition and communities that build around that. And I'm wondering, how far away are we from that sort of thing?
I mean, it's happening now. Those little Amazon one-click buttons that you can get them for like $5 or so, and it's just essentially one relay that's connected via Wi-Fi to whatever you want to connect it to. Now, Amazon has them hardwired to connect to the Amazon network, but hackers are already, rewiring those so you can press a button and turn off all the lights in your house, or your neighbor's house, or yeah. So it's already happening, and yes, the prices are coming down further and further, and the devices are getting smaller and smaller, and with all of the things you can do with wearables and all of them having their own APIs, and it's both almost overwhelming and scary and awesome to think about the things that we don't even know what I'll say these kids are going to come up with these devices. But I think we're going to see some amazing transformation in our everyday lives, and it's already happening. But in the next few years, wearables and IoT are just going to explode in every way. There'll probably be thousands of ways that are not useful, but at all. but there's so many things that could be useful that we can't even imagine yet, because this technology is so new that it's going to be. I'm excited about it because I'm looking forward to the time that I can just think of something and suddenly a case of Stella arrives at my door. It was just almost there. I mean, I can do it with an app right now, but imagine if I had a contact lens, I could just blink and do it. All right, thank you guys.